start by saying that I was born in Richfield, but not actually in Richfield. I was born on Bachelor's Island, which is just across the river, but it is technically in Richfield. And I've never had anything other than a Richfield address, and I'm almost 102 years old. But I'll start this with my great-grandmother and father, John and Martha Wood, that came from the St. Louis area. They were born in Missouri, and they crossed the plains. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. First, my great-grandfather John was a minister, and he had gone to a small town just outside of St. Louis, and there was going to be a trial there, because this was in 1864 when the Civil War was still on, and there was a mixture of people that agreed with one side or the other, and then they were having troubles. And in the process, while he was there, and being a Union sympathizer, some of the rebel soldiers didn't like the idea of being there, and so they ordered him out of town. And so he didn't put up an argument. He just mounted his horse and began to leave town. And they fired a few shots at him, not at him. They didn't know if it was intentional or not, or just to frighten him along. But anyway, one of those bullets hit him in the back, and he suffered for about 18 hours after that with help, but he passed away there. And he and his wife, my grandmother, great-grandmother, excuse me, had a plan to cross the plains in covered wagons on the old Oregon Trail. Well, after this happened, she decided then that they'd made all these plans, that they would go through with it, that they would take this wagon train to the coast, the Washington coast, and so they did, and they were in an 85 wagon train called the Big Missouri Train. The wagon master was a man by the name of Eli Watkins, and in later information we got that said that they made the trip uneventfully. They didn't have any problems, but what they had recorded in all this, the information was all lost, and so we never actually got the information of just exactly what happened. But they did cross the Oregon Trail and did get to Richfield, but they said it also took them 6 months. Wagons pulled by horses and oxen and whatever, and most people, of course, the younger ones, would have to walk or drive their livestock that they brought along, and so they didn't do much riding across in that 2,500-mile trip. But they did make it, and in the process, my great-grandfather and grandmother had 12 children, but some of them were very in the younger stages, and some, of course, were older. They said under 20s, and some were married. And we never did know and never found out how many of them made the trip. But mostly the children were female, and mostly all grown women or girls. And they're the ones, 3 or 4 of those, that finally came here. And my grandmother, who was 8 years old at the time, was with that train. And 2 of my great aunts, and now I found out it was 3. And that would be Etta Wood and my grandmother, and Talitha Cook, who was also Wood at the time, and then the great-grandmothers and her grandmothers of the Greeley family and the Zimmerly family. And there's some of those offspring of those people are still in this area. But I'm the only one from the Burrow side. And being as I don't have any sons, well, that name is going to disappear when I leave. But then I'll go to the other side. The great-grandparents from my father's side was George and Hannah Burrow. They were both born in England. They had a son, John, who was my grandfather. They came across, of course, the Atlantic and landed in New Orleans in 1847. And when grandfather John was 7 years old. And then things got a little hazy at that time. We lost the information that we should have had from that. And great-grandfather George supposedly went to California to get involved with the 49ers gold rush. And where Hannah and young John were in all this time, because this was in 1849, and where they were and how they existed is also unknown. But when they got together again, and how they got together, we don't know. But they got to this area and they homesteaded on Bachelor Island. And great-grandfather George didn't live that long. When they settled on the island in 1852, he died in 1856 and left Hannah a widow, and she lived to be 77 with son John, wound up like in his 20s or 30s, whatever. And how they managed to build homes and farms and whatever to live by is also unknown. But then great-grandfather George, of course, is the one that died in 1856 and left his only son, John, my grandfather, and his mother, Hannah, in charge of things. And somehow or another, they managed to work it into a pretty good farm on the island, and they're living out of it. But she died, grandmother Hannah died in 1877, and John at that time was whatever it is, would be 40 some odd years, 34 years or so old, but they managed to make a living somehow. And then Hannah died then in 1877, and then by that time John Burrow, my grandfather John, and Etta, my grandmother, had found one another in this sparse settlement here, and were married in about that same time. It's either 1877 or 78, because my aunt, my father's sister, was born in 1879 and my father in 1881. Now I bring these dates to your attention because my mother told me, after I was old enough to understand, that I was born in the same house, in the same room that my father was on Bachelor Island.
Wow.
Well, I was, in later years, I was real familiar with that house, but we didn't stay there. We moved off of there when I was 6 years old. And then when we bought a farm out northeast of Ridgefield that was known then, later years, as the Sevier property. And there had been several different families on that between those times, but none of them seemed to make a go of it, and so there was quite a few different owners. And then the Seviers broke it up into smaller pieces, and there's now quite a few homes on that same property. And excuse me. And so I have to backtrack a little bit and say what happened to me then. And all this time is my father was, after we left the island, he worked for the Davis family. He was a tugboat operator and towed a cattle and animal barge around when they had to move animals off the island and here and there and everywhere during the high water periods, which happened every year. Not some years more severe than others. And as a teenager, I could go with him on some of those trips, so I was kind of a river rat at the time. And so I understood what happened to these rivers and all this, and all these flood stages and all those things. And so then, after moving up to the hill, which where we lived on that farm for 10 years, in the hard times during the late 20s, we lost the property, and then we had to move off, and so we moved into a rented house on Maple Avenue in Ridgefield. And so then I go back to the schooling. When I started the first grade in 1921, in the old three-story building, wooden building that burned to the ground in May of 1927, and went through the first 6 grades, almost through the first 6 grades, because it burned down, just before we would complete the 6th grade. So the school people got together and rounded up some large rooms and buildings in town to finish this school year in. And so we wound up in the old Methodist church that's still standing in Ridgefield, and finished the 6th grade there. We started the 7th grade in the old Seventh-day Adventist church on the corner of Main Street and Cook Street in the northern part of Ridgefield. And managed to get through part of that, and in the meantime they were building a new high school, which was a 12-year school thing. And they completed that, and we moved into that in the later stages of the 7th grade, and then we finished through that in the high school then in the new building. And so then they got to thinking over the years. The school lasted approximately 40 years, and they began to see cracks in some of the timbers in the structure. And they said, well, the building was getting too dangerous, and there was a lot of controversy over this. And a lot of people didn't want to see this, but they started building a new high school then, and tore down the old building and left it vacant for quite a long time. But before that, they had built the Union Ridge Grade School to replace what had burned. But the old high school ground set vacant there, all except the athletic field, which is still there. And a lot of people don't know this, but that was named Wolf Field, W-U-L-F, in favor of a World War I soldier that was killed in action. And there's still families of that name in this area. And one of the ladies right here is with us. She is a wife of Clarence Arndt, and she's been here for a long time. I knew her family and her, of course, for a long time. But there's still others, not to mention any names, because there's descendants of some of those that are still here, the Zimmerleys and the Greeleys, and all of those of the Cook family did not, because Talitha Cook, his husband passed away, I guess, at a younger age, and she never remarried. And apparently she only had daughters. And they were, of course, Mrs. Maud Dearborn and Mrs. May Hall and Mrs. McGinn, that I can't remember her first name for some reason. But those descendants have gone, by the way, and the Cook family, May Cook, was married to a man by the name of Newman Hall, And he's the man that owned the cheese factory that was here in Richfield in those days. And that house, those two houses are still there. The one the McGinn family lived in was burned down and a new house was built there. Now it's right there behind the big redwood tree that stands right on North Main Street on the east side of the road. But things have changed considerably. I was, in 1960 to 64, I was mayor of Ridgefield. And the citizenship at that time, the citizens numbered about 800. And now it's in the thousands. And will be considerably more in years to come. So I'll have to have someone else in a younger age describe that to you. So I don't know how to add any more to my ancestors, because I've pretty much covered all that. So I will say thank you for your kind.
How did you meet your lovely Eunice?
Well, that's another story. Well, it's an odd story in a way, because when I was in the 4th grade, it was in the morning of whatever day, I can't remember that date, the door opened and here the attendant brought a young girl in to join the 4th grade. And she had moved here with her family from Colorado. And she had come from the little town of Hartman, Colorado. And little did I imagine that that little girl was going to be my wife for over 75 years. But that's where we actually first met, and that wasn't really an official meeting, but, we finished the 4th, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, 8th grade. We were freshmen in high school, and the family still had property in Colorado, so they moved back there in the middle of the freshman year, the 9th year. And they stayed in Colorado. She would finish the freshman class there and the sophomore and junior class. Then they moved back to Richfield again because they also still had their home that they had built when they were here before that time, before they had gone back to Colorado. And so she finished and graduated, and we graduated in the same class in 1933. And we never had, the only contact we ever had in school was when we were both in the senior play, and a senior class play. But we didn't really, we knew one another, but that's it. We didn't go together or anything like that. But that didn't happen until about 3 years later when, in playing amateur baseball, we met and had a few dates and what led to more serious things, and we got married in March the 20th of 1937. And of course, one of my daughters is in the audience here, and that's Mary Matney. She's the youngest of my 3 daughters. And we, since all that, had stayed right here in the town of Richfield, so I consider myself a native of the town, all right.
So what did you and Eunice do for dates or fun?
Well, at that time, I was working at Bradley Brothers Cedar Lumber and Shingle Mill in Richfield here, which hired close to 100 people. And so I had, first thing I bought as a young man was an automobile. The first one I had was a 31 Chevrolet. And, but we never dated with that car because we got married while I had changed cars. I had, at that time, I had a 1930 Chevrolet, 1936 Chevrolet, sorry. And so then the meetings got a little serious, and so then we got married. And that's how we traveled around in those days and with these cars. Of course, that's always a young man's fancy, was a car in those days. And they weren't fancy like they are now, but they still got us around here and there.
And how about Ridgefield itself? What stores were there then?
Well, Ridgefield at that time was quite a busy little place. Now the roads weren't that great, and the distances seemed like they were farther, but you could get almost anything you wanted in the town of Ridgefield. We had 2 big grocery stores, 2 barber shops, a shoe store, shoe repair store, and you could order almost anything through these stores that you could buy in these larger towns, the cities around. And we had an old movie theater, which I was shown a picture of just recently. It was on the corner of 4th and Main, an old stone mason dream, an old building with broken bricks and tile that were made at the old Ridgefield West, the brickyard out here northeast of town, which is no more, it's not operable anymore. The Muffet's family owned that and made a lot of the brick and mortar that some of these houses, well, all of it, but these houses are built of, and they're still standing, some of them. Then there were sawmills around all over. You could buy lumber anywhere, and where there was a few trees, there was a little sawmill. They were cutting them up because they had to get rid of them if they're going to have any ground to grow these gardens in that they needed so badly. But as I said, you could buy practically anything you wanted in the town, in these stores, the hardware store. And of course, in my younger days, it was a blacksmith shop too, where you shot horses and all that sort of thing. But that was way back in the early 1920s. But so we don't see any of that anymore now. But the major buildings in Ridgefield are pretty much the same as they were way back then. The old Ridgefield State Bank, which is now the City Hall, part of the City Hall, has been there for many years. And there's a Ford agency right across the street from the bank. That was Greeley's Garage. They sold Ford cars there then in later years when they got more modern. And so it wasn't a lack of things then, but then come the hard times why things kind of disappeared. And there was places, 2 or 3 places where you could buy gasoline for these cars, which you can't do now. You have to go out of town to buy gasoline. And so changes have been made over the years.
Do you remember any movies that you saw at that theater?
Well, yes. Mostly old cowboy movies, and I don't remember this so far back now. I don't remember the names of the actors that were in them, but it was quite a process to go to the movie. They had the ticket agency right out front and entry doors on either side of it, and of course they didn't have any. They had a piano player up there that would play the pianos, Mrs. Dixon, that would come exciting times in the movie while it got to a real high pitch. But we didn't really go to a lot of those movies because you didn't have the money. Kids didn't have money in those days like they do now. They got credit cards or whatever. But money was pretty hard to come by in those days. Things were tough. And that's one thing I've seen in my life is good times, bad times, war times, peace times, whatever. But I won't go into that because I'm supposed to make a talk to the graduating class, the Golden Grads, later in this month, and I don't want to give away too much of my story. They'll call it plagiarism.
And during the war, you were working?
Yes, I was working in this Bradley Brothers mill at the time, and I was already in draft age when it started, and I'd already signed up in the draft. But they wouldn't let me go. They kept giving me deferments. They said I was a person that needed to be there, because at that time had graduated and moved into a foreman's job. I was the shipping foreman of the mill. I was responsible for all of anything that was sold out of the property, and we loaded railroad cars. There was a railroad spur right into the mill, in the middle of it practically, and we loaded approximately 200 railroad cars a year, and that was my responsibility. And so they said I was too important, and they had me deferred. Well, I was deferred all the time I worked there, and as a foreman. I was a foreman for the last 4 years. In 1943, the mill burned down, and they didn't rebuild because the two brothers that owned it were getting up in years, and they decided they didn't want to tackle that kind of a tough proposition. So I went from there into the shipyards and helped build war vessels, the flat-top carriers. I helped build 50 of those flat-top aircraft carriers that they used during World War II. They used them more to transfer planes from one part to another. They didn't actually get into war with them, but some did, and some were lost during the war. And from there, after I got out of there, that plant closed, of course, in 1945 when they signed the peace treaty with the Japanese. And so that job disappeared also, where I worked up to a foreman in that, and they kept me deferred at the last part of that too. And then I went from there to the Weyerhaeuser paper mill in Longview. By that time, the war was over, and the deferment thing didn't mean anything anymore. You were free to go or do as you pleased. And you weren't subject to the draft. And when they drafted me, I was 30 years old and had 3 children, which at that time they didn't want people like that because it would cost too much money to take care of what was left as it was to keep me in the Army. So I was grateful for all that too, because I didn't serve in the Army in any way. I went to Fort Lewis, but it was only there one day, and I was told that I wasn't supposed to be there, that the draft board had made a mistake in sending me there, so they gave me a few dollars to come home on and told me to get out of there. So I was happy to do that.
When did the spud business, when did they start growing potatoes? And when did they phase out?
Potatoes were grown here long before I came here. The Zimmerly family was famous for the potato growing, and that was when they were shipped out of here mainly by stern wheelers, right here from the Richfield dock. And they just load them on board these steamers and take them to the cities or wherever salespeople wanted them. And these stern wheelers would operate up and down from La Center through Richfield and all up and down the Columbia, but mostly their destination was Portland. And the first time I ever went to Portland was on a stern wheeler, which I boarded right there from the island, and so I was less than 6 years old at the time. And so that was quite a journey, which would take them an hour or two to get to the St. John's area and Kenton areas, mostly where they landed. And that's where the big stockyards were too, that we delivered cattle to in all those years too.
Did you play any sports in high school?
Yes, I did. I was a letterman in football and baseball, a 3-year letterman in football, and I won only 2 in the baseball because they had some real good players ahead of me. I couldn't get into the the letter winning class. But in my senior year in 1933, we won the championship. We had a fine ball team. And so I didn't stop there. I played a lot of what they call town team baseball at that time, which was just amateur baseball. All the small towns in the areas had baseball teams. And I continued with baseball until I was 40 years old. And so then I decided that was enough of that. I was getting a little bit older and slower and couldn't run so fast and couldn't throw the ball so hard. So I decided that was time to quit.
Did you get to play with any of our other friends, Benny Ray or
Absolutely.
Ed Claiborne?
Yes, Bottomiller boys and Benny Ray and Clifford Potter. He came back from the University of Oregon and played some amateur baseball with us. And Donnie Woodward, who is in this attendance today, but his father and I were teammates. His dad was a pitcher. Now, Don will have to speak for himself about any baseball that he played, because he didn't go to school here. He went to school in Woodland.
Hey, it's a keeper.
So
I
what'd
got a
you-
question, John.
Pardon?
You hit a home run off of my dad once, didn't you?
Oh, yes. I hit several home runs in my career there. I was classed as a pretty good hitter.
Other questions?
How about, you had any relationships with Indians?
Now, just speak up a little bit.
Indians.
Indians.
Indians, well, yes, my ancestors said that at that time that they had quite a few problems with local Indians, and the Chinooks were one of those that had built this big casino out here. But they didn't build it, I mean, but that tribe did, had a helping hand.